It's Pete from Cheap Homesteading, and today's the day. I'm going to get my McCulloch 610 running. I want to get it running so I can run it on my beam machine. It's a chainsaw mill. I bought it a few years ago and I haven't used it. This is the story of my life. I buy things and don't have time to use them. So if I don't get the saw running, I'm not going to use it. So the reason I want to use such an old saw, I don't want to use my good Husky 55s to run my chainsaw mill. A friend of mine gave me this. It looks bigger than it is. It's only, I think, 60 cc's or something like that. But it's got a 3/8 chain, so it's easy to get like a bar and a ripping chain on it. And if I blow it up, there's no great deal of worry about it. So I'm going to run this on my beam machine. I have a homemade Alaskan sawmill I made a few years ago and I only used once. So what I want to do is get ready so when I do have a little bit of time, we can go out and try to cut some lumber. So let's get this thing running. Okay, so you have a saw that sat for a very, very long time. I can guarantee the carburetor's gummed up, the tank's gummed up. It is far better for you to take the carburetor off, clean the carburetor, and then start from there. Clean out the tank, fill it up. Because even if I get it running and I'm out there with the sawmill wide open, if it leans out, you will blow up the you'll blow up the engine. So that means if it just doesn't get enough fuel going into the engine, it actually heats up. That's funny. I guess it just warps, but it does come back. That's a big old felt filter. I wonder if I can get it. No, I don't even know if I can get one of those. These carburetors are so easy to remove. I love this. It's access. You pull the filter off, and it's basically these two screws, and the whole thing comes out. So what we're going to do is blow this off, and then we're going to start taking the carburetor off it. So make sure you wear safety glasses. Okay, so I made the bench clean. I blew it off. I blew off where the carburetor is. You don't want junk falling down in there. Okay, so what you're going to do is remove this little rubber grommet. I find it easier to just push it in to the air box. This makes it easier to remove the carburetor out. So now you remove the two screws that hold the carburetor down. You know, someone paid good money for this saw and they probably were all proud of it and they used it. And then it suddenly becomes junk. Someone has paid for this thing and they paid their good money for it, and now it sits and it's junk. And I kind of like taking advantage of that. This isn't the biggest saw, but it seems like a lot of people that have chainsaw mills eventually go to normal sawmills. And if that's the case, I don't want to put $1,600 into buying a Stihl chainsaw and then to just replace it. Really? Okay, so we've just removed the choke. It's just a little plate that goes over the top front of your carburetor. Very simple system. So you just pry up on here and it'll pop off this lever. You pry it up on the carburetor and we're going to get the throttle linkage off. You just don't bend it. Take your time. There you go till it fits off. We're going to take your fuel line off. You know what? If you learn how to clean a carburetor, it really does give you a major advantage because most of these carburetors are pretty well identical. There's not much difference to them. And so if you can clean one, you can clean multitude of other ones. So if you learn how to clean one, you can clean lots of them. From weed eaters to chainsaws. Like, not everyone has a chainsaw, but everyone has a weed eater. So, well, most people do. So if you can clean a chainsaw carb, you can clean a weed eater carb, you can do whatever. So it's important skill to learn in my book. Okay, I'll move this over here. Okay, so we're gonna blow off the carburetor. It is really important to clean everything. If you don't have a compressor, get a can of brake clean, put it in a well-ventilated area, and just spray it off and clean it. The reason being is you don't want to clean your carburetor and get a chunk of junk in there. You've totally defeated your purpose. So now we got the carburetor off. We're gonna clean it up. So I need to get some small Phillips screwdrivers. Okay, so now we're gonna remove this plate. This forces it to be in the same location, these two little pins. This is on the carburetor, this is on the plate. So you really can't mess up putting it back together, but try to lay everything out in a way that you're going to install it back in the same way. You're not going to mess the installation up on something. Okay, so be gentle and try to pry it up, because I don't know if I can even get this gasket. McCulloch doesn't exist anymore. So if there's any way I can get it off and I don't totally destroy this, this is the best way, because there we go, she's all together. So in there is your needle and seat. Okay, so now what we're gonna have to do is remove the high and low jet. Now it's really important you got your high and low jet, and it's marked on the carburetor. So I'm going to put high on my block of wood or paper or whatever. So you're going to screw it clockwise. So that was only a half a turn to the seated position. Half a turn to the seated position. So now I'll unscrew the high one. I like to set it down on it. So then I'm going to put my low one. We're going to screw this one in and count the turns. Three and a quarter turns. I think that's wrong. Someone's been playing with that. But we're gonna write down what it is anyways. We're gonna set this whole thing aside. I like to make a little mark. Most times you can't mess up the reinstallation, but you put a little mark there, you know that's where it's going. The funny thing is, the moment you think that you're not gonna mess it up, you will, so plan for it. Okay. Ooh, there you go. That actually looks really, really clean. I'm thinking that someone actually ran this out of fuel and put it in storage. That is actually the first time I've ever seen that. Normally, you know, you set it down, you have fuel in it, and it clogs up, but it's crystal clean. So we're going to take it the rest of the way apart, because it's apart. We're going to blow it all the passages, and then we're going to put it back together and see if it runs. You got your needle. There's a little screw that holds that in, and whatever you do, do not bend this. Be careful with it. So you're going to put your thumb over it, and you're going to take this little screw out. Better use this screwdriver. That ain't working. Okay, so now you're going to loosen that screw off. gently lift this off. Don't lose the pieces. And you just tap and the needle comes out. On some small engines, not so much chainsaws, but like 8-horse snow blowers and different kind of stuff like that, there's a little rubber seat, and when you blow this out, the thing will fly and you won't notice. So what we're gonna do is now I have it all apart. What we're gonna do is get some carburetor cleaner, blow it in all the passages, blow it out, and then we're gonna start reassembling. So you got your carburetor cleaner. Make sure you don't get it in your eyes, because if you squirt in here, it can squirt back at you. Try to make sure it's in a safe direction. Blow it in every port you can. Wow, that was great. Make sure I don't get that on my screen. Okay, so I'm gonna blow it in all these holes. Every little hole. There's all these little holes here. I got my compressor and I'm gonna blow it all these passages. Okay, so now she's all blown out. We're gonna start reassembling. We're gonna take a good look at the needle. The needle is clean. Someone actually really did clean, like run it out of fuel. A good way of actually storing a small engine is basically running it out of fuel. Okay, so now I'm gonna set this spring. This spring, there's a high likelihood if it springs out of your hand, you're gonna lose it. It's tiny, tiny, so you set it in the middle slot there. What we're gonna do is we got the needle, we got the little holder. You just hook the needle on there. You get your pin, you put this in, and you've already set your spring down. So then you just gently put this down in one swoop, and you get your little pin lined up. So you slide it under here and then just tighten up your screw. It's really important not to bend this. Just gently and make sure it's tight, tight, tight. It's aluminum though, so not too tight or you'll strip it. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is make sure that this moves freely. It's kind of funny, but it moves freely. Right there. There we go. So see, you wanna make sure it moves freely, and it does. So now, we're checking the gasket. So this little thing here, as air goes in, it moves open and close your needle. Okay, so now you got this little piece. I'm lining it up. There's a little hole in here. And you can, I don't know if you can see it, but the needle moves when that gets pushed. So what we're gonna do is put this gasket back on, and there's two little holes that line up. Everything moves freely. We're gonna wipe this plate up really good. And there's a little tab. Make sure the tab lines up with one of the pins, and then you should be golden. Having the skills to fix your own stuff just gives you the option to be able to get stuff cheap and maybe do a few more things without putting yourself in the poorhouse. I'm telling you, like bigger chainsaws, $1,600. I don't know how people do that. Number one, with time. I don't have time. So I'd rather have a cheap chainsaw and have it sit here and have the skills to get it running. And even if I use it a couple days, I'm not out a bunch of money. If I spend big money on a chainsaw mill, I got to get my money out of it. And I got other things I gotta do. I gotta get my bees and all that kind of stuff. So, and then you start having stress because you spent that much. So sometimes it's better just not to spend it at all, I'm thinking. So, you tighten up the screws evenly. So now we're gonna start putting the plate on the top. Everything's been cleaned. Make sure you put everything back the way you had it. One thing that is really, really important, there's little reed valves here and here. There's little backings. The reed valves are actually here and here. And you gotta make sure they're not sticky and there's not stuff all over them. These are all perfectly clean. Perfectly clean. So there's no issue there. But the problem is if they're ever sticky, you're gonna run into some serious problems trying to get it to run properly. Okay, so now we're gonna reinstall the carburetor. You gotta make sure, I recommend you change all the gaskets, but this thing's becoming old enough that I don't know if I can get gaskets for it. But this gasket's fully intact, so I'm gonna reuse it, but always put new ones. Don't do as I do. Do as I say. Okay, so we got the saw back here now. We're gonna wipe this up. Dump the fuel out of the tank. Okay. So the fuel's dumped out. Definitely fresh fuel. So the guy that got it tried to get it running and he couldn't. So what we're gonna do is try to fish the fuel filter out of here. Okay, so we're gonna fish out the fuel filter. On these things, they're kind of a primitive fuel filter. It's like a little felt piece that sticks in the end of the fuel line, like this. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna blow out. Okay, that looks like that blows out nice and clear. So we're gonna throw that back in there. And we're gonna throw the carburetor back on this thing. Okay, so now we're gonna hook our throttle linkage up. Okay, before we put our carburetor in, I'm gonna stick the grommet back in the airbox cover. So we fish it through the hole. Make sure your linkages are all set nice. And then I put my fuel line back on. You have to push down a little bit on the throttle linkage when you go to install it, or the lever's over center. You can't force it. Okay, so it's just sitting there. We're gonna put our choke lever back on, and you pry up on it, and on this little plastic lever, there's two pins that stick out either side, and when you pry on it, they kind of hook in there. So we're gonna blow off this bottom plate away from the carburetor though. Clean it all out real good. There's a little bushing here. Okay, there's a little bushing here that has to fit in the middle of your choke lever. So don't pinch it or anything like that. Just kind of gently go, and you'll have to make sure that that everything moves freely once you are everything's installed. Because if the plate's pinched, your choke's not going to move freely. So. Okay, we're just going to tighten this up gently for now. Okay, so evenly tighten them up. You want to make sure, you want to make sure that your choke works. and it does. Even after you tighten it, you want to make sure that it works. There we go. Tighten evenly. Back and forth. Okay. Throttle works. Choke works. Everything seems to move free. The high jet, which is the top one. It's really important not to cross thread this into the carburetor, and this rubber was giving a little bit of an angle. Okay, so you screw in, and then we're going to go back 1/2 turn, and we're going to get our low needle now. I'm going to slide that in. Get the spring on the end of it, and then we will install our low needle. As I say, it's better to kind of do it with your fingers and not strip it. Stripping it is bad. So I screw that in all the way. So we're going to go back 1/2 turn. We're going to go back 1/2 turn. I don't know why it was adjusted so high. I'm guessing I don't know. He was trying to get it to run better or something. I don't know. Now I'm fishing this rubber grommet back out around the needles. These old saws ran on like 30-to-1 or something like that. And most modern saws run on about 50-to-1. So all my mix is 50-to-1. So I just gave it a little bit of an extra gulp of oil for now. If I use this on the Alaskan sawmill, I will go and physically mix up a can of 50-to-1 or whatever it is. This chain is loose. The only deal breaker for me is old saws a lot of times don't have chain brakes. So you really shouldn't be using them in the woods. It's not worth it, get hurt. But this must have been one of the first saws that had a chain brake for sure. So, kind of interested to see if it runs. So let's see. So I have it on 1/2, so I have 1/2 a turn on the high and the low. So we're going to pull the choke out, make sure the switch is to the on position, and let's see if it starts. Ooh, that looks good. Push the choke. Wow, she runs like a champ. We'll put the choke out again. Okay, so I'm going to try to get to idle, so I'm going to turn up counterclockwise another 1/2 turn on the low out and see if it runs better. Okay, I'm going to do another 1/4. So that's like 2 1/4. Okay, so what I did was, at first it wouldn't idle. So I turned up the low screw a little bit till it would idle. And then I turned down my throttle pin. All it does is stop the throttle from moving as far. Until the chain would stop, it would come to an idle. So now it idles really good, but when you hit the throttle, it just goes blah. So it's like running out of fuel. So we got to turn up the high idle just a little bit until we can get it running good, and then we'll adjust from there. Okay, so my high idle, I'm going to adjust another quarter turn out. See what that does. Okay, so basically I got it adjusted so it runs good, revs up, everything. So now we got to do our final adjustments, so we're going to take it outside and do that. What you do is you basically rev it up all the way, use your high idle adjustment screw, and crank it until it just starts to sputter. And don't take your time, don't do too fast. Let the engine catch up. So you do that till it starts to sputter, you count it, the turns back until it starts to sputter on the lean side, and then you put it halfway in the middle. I actually give it a little more to the rich side. Very rarely does it ever seize an engine because it's too rich, it's because it's too lean. So let's go do this. So there you go, my McCulloch 610 is ready to go on my beam machine. So you guys have a good one.